that we've created 12,000 jobs in the private sector in the last 12 months. The live register has been falling, very small, but it has been falling for the last 7 months. And I think that's something that must be taken into account. And one of the most important things that I felt this government did to give confidence to people that, to go back to work and to look for jobs was the reversal of the minimum wage cut, which was one of the first moves that was done in government, and increased the universal social charge exemption level from 4,000 to 10,000. That basically removed the 330,000 lowest paid people in the workforce out of the universal social contribution charge. They were very positive things, and I think there's a need to sort of highlight those so that people understand what even though they're small things, they are happening. Where are all these jobs coming from? They're coming from both direct foreign investment and from our own indigenous companies that are working hard. Not just as SMEs, but some of our bigger companies as well. There are things happening out there. PayPal, Eli Lilly, Cisco, IBM, HP, Hewlett-Packard and Abbott Pharmaceuticals are all internationally recognised companies and companies that are instantly recognisable by most people in this country. They're all investing in Ireland. Kerry Group, one of our own indigenous multinational companies with businesses right across the world, they are making a massive commitment and a massive investment in this country. This is because there is confidence being restored that our economy is on the right track, that we are doing something right. International investment sentiment towards this country is improving. It may not be percolating right down and it may not be recognised maybe by everybody, but there is stability coming into this country slowly but surely. The government has been focusing on trying to get people back to work. Under normal international circumstances, an economy must completely stabilise and start seeing growth before you can get significant reductions in unemployment numbers. But we can't wait that long. And that's why this government is very focused on looking at different areas and seeing if we can promote employment within the different sectors. And many of the policies have been targeted on that. Not all of these policies will work, but at least the government is trying to make things work. So there is a Pathways to Work strategy that is targeting the long-term unemployment. There was the new National Internment Scheme with 5,500 places already filled. There's an extra 15,000 places for further education and training programmes. There's the launching a new ICT educational strategy to double the annual output of ICT graduates from 1,000 to 2,000 by 2018. Very targeted, very focused positions to get people into employment. There was the VAT reduction on tourism-related services, which has seen an increase in the number of tourists and is creating more jobs in the tourist sector, because this was a sector that was identified that has potential for growth if we target our resources into it. And it's making a return. Now, some people might try to knock that and say it might have happened anyway, but it has happened. And the government is looking at these areas that we can put our very scarce resources into and see if we can get a maximum return on it. There's the new support programme for home energy retrofitting, and that has the potential to create 2,000 jobs right across the country. It's a small, maybe a small beginning, but it will make an impact for those 2,000 people who will be able to go back to work and see the benefits that it has to their lifestyle. We're continuing to establish Ireland as a digital hub, with new jobs and investment announcements for new and established companies in that sector in this country. Twitter, Google, PayPal, Dropbox, all names which are instantly recognisable to the tech-savvy younger generations and older generations of this country. Everybody knows who those organisations are. Companies, massive global companies with huge potential for growth, coming into Ireland to establish themselves. We're launching a major new school building initiative which will create an estimated 15,000 direct and 3,000 indirect jobs in the coming years. But more importantly, it will provide 80,000 school places for the increase in school population that we're seeing in this country. These are very important initiatives spread across the country, and they are and will make an impact. There's the launch of a partial credit guarantee scheme for small and medium-sized businesses and a separate microfinancing fund. And interestingly, to show where all this is going on the macro level, I move away too much from talking about billions because I think people don't quite grasp what billions are. But we have seen in the deposits held in Irish banks, the deposits in these banks have increased to 155 billion. That is up 15 billion from the lowest point that was reached in July 2011 of 140 billion. Again, small increases, small improvements, but it is showing that there are small changes coming that are positive changes in the right light. And I think we should be very supportive of these changes. In regards to where people talk about fairness in the government and how we're trying to be as fair as possible and trying to protect the vulnerable and sick, I think there are things that have been done that should be highlighted and should be commended. The increased mortgage interest relief to 30% for first-time buyers between the years 2004 and 2008 is helping that cohort of people who are the most vulnerable to negative equity and are also, in fact, the ones who are most vulnerable to mortgage arrears, because they did pay the highest price for their houses. They're usually young people. They're also the ones who have been very, very vulnerable to job losses when our economy crashed initially. We've also provided 67 million in grants to improve or adapt private homes of older people and people with a disability in 2012.
2 minutes. Yeah.
That's quite significant when you consider where we are at this moment in time. So these are the small issues that the government have been dealing with, making a very significant impact on people's lives, helping to get this country working again, and helping to ease the financial pain and the shock of the austerity on those who are most vulnerable in our society. And I'm delighted now to see that the government has today announced the infrastructure stimulus public-private partnership programme, which again is focused on delivering a maximum amount of jobs, delivering the best infrastructure to help our people. It's going to be delivering new schools right across the country. It's going to be delivering health centres in our health services. It's going to be delivering new Garda stations. I must say, some of the Garda stations that people talk about being closed down, ones that I'm aware of myself, I thought they were already closed down. They don't really add that much to the community as the ones that I'm aware of. And I think that there's a need for us to be more realistic about what we can achieve with the resources we have, and not to trying to think that we should hold back progress. If we were really working on the theories of some of the opposition deputies, our Gardaí would still be going around on bicycles. We have to constantly change and innovate how we do everything. And that's the health service, that's education. School education curriculums are changing, and Garda policing is changing. Everything changes in society. We need to change with it, and not to be. And I think that there's a need for more open-mindedness and broader-mindedness by some of the members of the opposition when they look at what the government is doing. There's going to be a huge change in infrastructure, and I'm glad to see that the PPP programmes announced today will re-kick-start the construction of major roadways in this country, and not just provide the necessary jobs, but to improve our infrastructure so that we can remain competitive and remain increasing the number of jobs that we're getting from foreign investment and from SMEs, as I've already pointed out, the massive increase we're seeing in jobs in the private sector. There are issues that I would like to just touch on, but I just literally mentioned them out. I do hope that the extension to Croke Park agreement discussions going on at the moment will deliver. There is a very serious issue here. The days of just giving money to get us out of our problems are over. If these talks were to fail, there is a very serious threat that, yes, public sector pays might be cut in the future. I hope that does not happen. I think there's huge potential here for the Croke Park deal to be extended and to continue delivering on the very piecemeal but very important changes that have happened so far. And I would really like to see this being implemented and actually worked up.
Thank you, Deputy. I have to ask the Deputy to conclude his matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now call on Deputy Brendan Smith.
Thank you, Alas Concorda. I'm glad for the opportunity to make a short contribution on this important bill. Well, I'm sure there will be a 2014 finance bill next year enacting the measures announced in the next budget in the latter half of this year. I presume a second stage debate on that finance bill will be a process that looks quite like being quite different to the process we have at present due to the changes being heralded by new EU rules on budgeting. The recent agreement on the two-pack virtually ensures that the next budget will be in October and will be subject to greater EU budgetary and economic coordination among Eurozone countries. I note Minister Noonan's remarks yesterday, and I quote, He very much welcomed this morning's agreement on the two-pack. This is a key piece of the Eurozone's economic architecture, has been an Irish presidency priority, unquote. I compliment Minister Noonan, his officials in his department, and indeed the officials in the Irish Permanent Representation in Brussels for their hard work and effort in achieving this deal. I would also take the opportunity to remind ministers that there is always a risk associated with announcing a budget, even a draft budget in October, when the economic data for that year is not available. And I'm sure the Department of Finance and Minister Noonan is more conscious than any of us of the importance of November in regard to income tax and taxation returns in general. That risk includes the increased possibility of having to produce supplementary budgets the following year to correct for shortfalls. Perhaps the government has already discounted this risk or weighed it against their own experience. After all, Budget 2012 was held at after all, Budget 2013, I should say, was held at the end of last year, the beginning of December, but the government still had to provide supplementary estimates last year from Ministers Riley and Burton. Indeed, in the case of Minister Burton's Department of Social Protection, that supplementary estimate was almost €700 million, which was almost furtively brought to a Dáil committee on the very morning of last December's budget. Perhaps the Minister, when he gets an opportunity to wrap up this debate or in committee, might expand on the impact of this two-pack deal, and indeed a six-pack deal will have on the preparation, timetabling and announcement of the next budget, and set out roughly how the sequencing will work out and the role the Oireachtas will play. Many analysts and observers have criticised Budget 2013 as deeply unfair, unjust and regressive. Those comments come not from political parties alone, but from many independent economists and other analysts. Unfortunately, last week's CSO statistics show that poverty is increasing. There are now in excess of 700,000 Irish people living in poverty, and the proportion of Ireland's population now at risk of poverty has jumped, unfortunately. There are huge pressures, as we all know, from our everyday work and constituencies on families, particularly the age group that have mortgages and dependent children. I believe that there is nothing in this finance bill that undoes the extra pressures that were put on families with the budgetary measures, such as the taxation of maternity benefit, the reduction in child benefit, the reduction in back-to-school costs, the abolition of the PRSI allowance. Those are all additional pressures on families where the household budget was under pressure even before those measures were introduced. My colleague, Deputy Michael McGrath, the other night in speaking on this particular bill, welcomed some of the measures that the ministers and the government are introducing, particularly in the area for the small and medium enterprises. We all understand the huge importance of creating the proper environment that we will have much needed job creation. Daily we are seeing the devastation that unemployment is bringing to individuals, to families and to communities. This is a problem across the country. It is not just an urban phenomenon or a rural one, but unfortunately a societal one. Our towns and villages are being hollowed out not only by the numbers of well-educated, bright and intelligent young people choosing to leave home and travel abroad in search of work, but by the numbers of men and women who are withdrawing from community life, have been caught in the cycle of long-term unemployment. There are now nearly 200,000 people out of work for over a year. This is indeed a serious issue and goes without saying. We know that once someone spends a year or more out of the workforce, it becomes increasingly difficult to get back to full-time paid employment at a decent wage level. We also have the problem of many self-employed people who don't have adequate social welfare entitlements once they're no longer in the labour force. And that is a particular issue. And indeed, I come across many constituents who haven't been self-employed and who are no longer gainfully employed. They just want to get on a scheme, but they can't because they don't qualify for an unemployment payment because of the household income, even though it may be very, very limited. We saw in the 1980s and the 1990s how difficult it was to overcome and end the scourge of long-term, almost cross-generational unemployment, which had blighted this country the preceding decades. Unfortunately, estates and communities and parishes were blighted through unemployment and emigration. Jobs must be at the heart of the finance bill. It must be at the heart, indeed, of most of our legislative measures and discussions in this House. Creating the conditions for jobs to be created is the biggest single policy lever the government possesses to end the fatal spiral of poverty that I mentioned earlier. We all welcome, and very much welcome, recent significant job announcements, mainly through foreign direct investment, and some very, very importantly, that we don't attach enough importance to, through indigenous enterprises. Much of those job announcements are additional employment opportunities at major corporations that were established here over the past 10 to 15 years. And of course, any new enterprise coming here to set up in this country for the first time is very, very welcome, and we warmly welcome such announcements as well. Announcements like this are welcome, both for the jobs directly created and for the investment it brings to a locality. But our unemployment crisis will not be resolved by foreign direct investment alone, welcome and important as it is. The jobs crisis will only be truly tackled by indigenous job creation, by small and medium-sized local Irish businesses growing, succeeding, maintaining and creating jobs, and start-up firms which see a niche in the market and supply that market. There is still a great entrepreneurial spirit in this country. It is there in every county, in every town and every parish, but it needs the support, the backing and the confidence to thrive, both from local government and from central government. It also needs a continuing reduction in regulatory costs, which are still a huge burden on enterprise. Where the Minister tells us, and I quote, the SME sector will be the driver of the economic recovery across the country, unquote. We do not see enough, I believe, in this finance bill to help create or foster sufficiently that entrepreneurial environment. Yes, the Minister does, and I compliment him on it, propose some new measures in regard to improving research and development in the area of tax credits, and includes hotels and employment and investment incentive scheme, two measures that we do welcome. But these and other proposals could hardly be described as radical enough, or indeed far-reaching enough, to make that dent in the unemployment problems. We're in the midst of a jobs crisis which is compounded by an ongoing slump in domestic consumption. This is the time for more creative and dynamic thinking. As I already mentioned, the economy is suffering from very weak overall levels of consumer spending, and there are still very significant levels of savings around, as Deputy Toomey referred to earlier. There is another major issue in the domestic economy, and that is the significant growth in the black economy. As a border county TD, as a person having the privilege to represent two of the Ulster counties in Dáil, Éireann, Cavan and Monaghan, I want to say that there is particular concern, and I've raised it in this House before, with regard to the black economy and the smuggling of fuel, not just the smuggling of fuel, diesel and petrol, but also solid fuels, and also alcohol, tobacco, and a range of other products across the border. That economy is thriving, unfortunately, and doing untold damage to our revenue base here. I am grateful that my colleague Deputy Michael McGrath made specific reference on Tuesday night in his contribution to this bill to the growing issue of the smuggling and illegal sale of solid fuel products in the border area. The proposed extension of the carbon tax to solid fuels on a phased basis will not help combat this illicit trade. As colleagues in the House would be aware, the Government intends to gradually increase the tax rate applied to €10 per tonne from the 1st of May 2013 this year, and to €20 per tonne from the 1st of May 2014. This will add, I understand, €2.50 to a 40-kilo bag of coal and 50 cents to a bale of briquettes, leaving an average family paying an extra €130 over the winter months. Introducing these phased carbon tax increases in solid fuels without considering the impact on poorer families and on the increasing fuel smuggling trade seems like an example of non-joined-up thinking. I think back a number of years ago that when the carbon tax was introduced first, in regard to solid fuel, in regard to coal and turf and that, I think it was always the idea that the carbon tax would not be applied to those particular products until there was practically an equivalent price north of the border as well. That's not the position at the moment, and I know from some fuel traders at the moment, they are very, very concerned at the possible impact on the trade south of the border due to the price differential that will occur when that extra taxation is imposed. So I would ask that the Minister and his officials would examine the the particular effects of the increase in this taxation and the actual loss to the Exchequer that might occur instead of increased revenue to the National Exchequer. And I think some of the fuel merchants that I spoke to pointed out to me very, very clearly that with smuggling taking place at the moment and with the potential for further losses in their trade, that they will leave off employees with the resultant loss to our own Exchequer in income tax and PRSI, and the loss in other revenues as well. So I hope that that's a particular issue that can be examined before the finance bill is finalised. On a related issue, my Deputy Michael McGrath, on behalf of our party, offered a modest but potentially effective suggestion to the Minister that could help stimulate some local activity right throughout the country. He proposed providing a tax credit of up to €2,500 to be made available for approved home improvement works, subject to the homeowner engaging a registered tax-compliant contractor. This simple, cost-effective measure could provide a significant boost for local economies as contractors purchase goods and spend money in their local shops. It would also help reduce activity in the black economy, particularly in terms of small-scale building jobs, home improvement and renovation work. We can bring more of this activity into the mainstream economy by using the taxation code imaginatively. Such measures, I believe, could actually generate additional revenue for the Exchequer rather than being a burden on the public finances. I believe it would have the added benefit of increasing VAT and income tax receipts. Just returning to the extension of the Employment and Investment Incentive Scheme to the hotel sector, I want to join with other colleagues in the House in welcoming this development. The tourism industry is very important right throughout our state. It's particularly important to rural areas where it's not easy to attract the foreign direct investment, or it's not that easy to set up a major manufacturing plant. That's where tourism, depending on the natural resources of the area, can be very, very important. One of the issues now in the industry is that many of the hotels in my own border region, in particular, I'm thinking of Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal, where they are in significant financial trouble. Many face debt overhangs, which, if not addressed, will lead to significant job losses. Once again, I think that the Minister could and should go further than he has. My colleagues have already suggested that there are a number of further policy avenues which we would urge the Minister to take on board during the course of this debate. Deputy Michael McGrath has already spoken about the possibility of setting up a hotel restructuring fund using funds for the National Pensions Reserve Fund to purchase assets that have a commercially sound prospect for profitability and growth. Alternatively, the Minister should look to setting up a qualifying investor fund for hotels that may be attractive to private investors, especially from abroad, who would like to invest in Irish hotels but do not wish to own hotels directly. Oftentimes, I believe that we undervalue the importance of the hotel sector, the importance of the hotel infrastructure to the generation of employment locally and its contribution to the economy. Any good hotel in a small town is every bit as important as a substantial factory, so it is, and we know that very well. So it's one sector that's under increasing pressure because of the growth in hotel numbers and the growth in bed capacity right throughout the country over the past decade. I also just want to mention the car industry and the increase in vehicle registration tax. I know from speaking to a garage owner that he instanced to me that if you take a run-of-the-mill car like a Volkswagen Passat, the changes in VRT in the budget amounted to almost €900 of an increase in VRT on what is generally a family car. It was a Passat vehicle that he spoke about. So I know that the people in the motor industry are very concerned about possible job losses and that the sales have gone down substantially. I know from speaking to a different person who worked in the motor industry some years ago, who is now retired from it and just contacted me, and who was urging that the government should consider again a car scrappage scheme. I don't know how feasible that is, but the point that was made to me by this former worker in the motor industry was that when scrappage schemes existed before, Many of the people who availed of the scrappage scheme were people who had money in the bank, who were careful about spending it, but he thought that it would give that leverage and generate that extra expenditure with that particular encouragement. So I think it's an area that in view of the severe difficulties facing the motor industry right throughout the country, that it's one area that should be given some consideration. And as we know, the car scrappage scheme has contributed considerably to an enhancement of in the environment as well. Could I also say one of the huge problems for many of the smaller enterprises, and indeed for some of the smaller enterprises, and it's not directly related to the finance bill, but it's a burden and significant cost on business, is the commercial rates throughout the country. It's an area that, once again, is a tax that's not based on ability to pay. And when you walk into some of the small hotels or some small pubs in particular, and the owner shows you the rates bill, the annual rates bill, it's very, very substantial before that person has a turnover of a cent or a euro. It's an area, I think, that needs some reform, major reform, and it's an area that we need to address. Fortunately, over the past number of years, we've had a substantial increase in exports in all sectors, and that's welcome. And I suppose we've had relative currency stability particularly between the euro and sterling. And we recall that back in 2008, I remember in the last quarter of that year, sterling depreciated by more than 24%, something more than 24% in a 3-month period from the end of October to the end of December. That caused huge pressures on our businesses that were exporting to the sterling area, because they had set prices and bought in at a different exchange rate as such. There has been some movement again in the weakness of sterling, and we should hope that there is continued stability in the currency, because we export more than 40% of our goods to the sterling area, our nearest neighbour, and naturally exports are hugely important for the economic growth and for the job creation that we need in this country. I mentioned earlier that I welcome the improvement in tax credits in the whole area of research and development. Probably in the past 12 to 15 years, there has been a huge level of investment and expansion in the whole area of research, development and innovation. That has been provided by state funding through our own exchequer, but it also has been assisted by government, through government departments and through state agencies, being able to draw down substantial funds directly from Europe as well. And Commissioner Maura Geoghegan-Quinn had an article in one of the papers earlier in the week where she was outlining the value and the necessity to invest in research and development. And she highlighted in particular that our country had been very, very successful in drawing down very substantial funds from Programme 7.
Just 1 minute remaining.
And I know in those areas, the likes of Teagasc and the Marine Institute have been leaders in drawing down funding from the European Union, and that's very, very important. We know that we need continued investment in research and development, not just for the major corporations, but also for our small and medium enterprises. And I welcome the fact that over the past number of years, there has been a greater working and collaboration and partnership between our universities, our institutes of technology and industry. For far too long, we had too many institutions in this country. We had our universities, we had our institutes, and we had our commercial semi-state bodies as well, working in isolation. That has changed over the past decade or so, and it can improve even more, because I believe where there is research and development on in a university, that has to be very much industry-led as well as learning-led as well. And there is great scope there for further potential. And I take the opportunity to compliment some of our universities and institutes of technology have been very good. They have been forward-thinking, they have been progressive in working with industry in their areas to ensure that research and development is there to assist in the development of product and added value. And I remember one major international corporation in the food side stating to me at Cahill in conclusion that one of the reasons why they invested in this country was because of the research capacity of Teagasc's Moore Park facility. So all of that is important, and I welcome the fact that some additional measures are being introduced in this bill to assist in research and development. And again, in conclusion, research and development cannot be just confined to the major players in our industry and our major players in business. It's important as well for the small and medium enterprise sector. So thank you,
Thank you, Deputy. The next speaker is Deputy Dan Neville, and you're sharing time with Deputy
Tom Barry.
Tom Barry. You have 10 minutes each.
I welcome the opportunity to contribute to the finance bill, which gives which implements the taxation measures announced in the budget in December. As others have said, one of the key issues around the budget and the measures in it is the whole area of job creation. And I suppose that's the most important issue, one of the most important issues which we must deal with and introduce all incentives and all support for creating our jobs, because to lose one's job, and we have over 400,000 people who are unemployed, but to lose one's job is one of the most traumatic events that can take place in a person's career and a person's life. And I'm speaking from personal experience myself. Many years ago, of being told at 8 o'clock one morning that I was being made redundant on statutory redundancy after several decades of contributing to an organisation. But you know, that's the way things, and the shock and the trauma of losing one's job and of becoming unemployed for the first time or any time is not fully understood or appreciated. There is almost a period of mourning because of your changed circumstances, and we know from many studies how it does affect one's person's esteem, one's person's relationships, because, you know, to lose the implications of losing a job, especially in present circumstances where many people have mortgages, who have debt, and who have planned their life around full-time employment, but now find themselves in a totally different situation, causes extreme stress, because if it's one thing we'll ask when we meet somebody new, there are three things we ask them. One, what is your name? Where do you live? And what do you do? So we attach in our society a lot of esteem to our contribution to our society and what we do in our daily lives by way of doing so. The stress that can create extreme difficulties within families, because inevitably when that level of difficulty arises, where there's a danger, especially a danger of losing one's home, or in certain circumstances losing their home, this is one of the most stressful situations that people can experience, because our home is so important in our lives that to have the threat of losing it. And that's why it's so important to support every side of this House who say that the mortgage situation has to be dealt with as quickly as possible, and in a fair way as possible, and in an understanding way as possible, an understanding of how people, what effect the loss of one's home or the threat of the loss of one's home. So I think it's vitally important that that is recognised, and that the banks recognise this as well as part of their civic responsibility towards our people, and towards their customers, whom they, in some ways, placed their client in that position. Now, we can say the client requested advice, in relation to the matter and made a final decision. And of course, that is correct. But at the same time, the banks have were, with hindsight, and maybe should have been with foresight, reckless in how they dealt with the whole housing situation and created the bubble that has caused us such difficulties. Now, you know, when the stress arises within the family because of the loss of one's employment, you can have personal difficulties, and no matter how much parents might want to protect their children against the stresses that they are experiencing, inevitably the children and the young people, because a lot of the people who are involved in this situation are people who bought houses at the time of the boom, their home at the time of the boom, and are now were settled, married, in a good position and have families. And they're the people who are most hit in relation to the whole area of job loss and the mortgage difficulty that can arise with it. But often these stresses can cause relationship breakdown, family difficulties, relationship breakdown. It can lead people to take comfort in increased alcohol consumption or drug use to relieve them of the stresses that they have. And we know that going down that road can lead to serious mental health difficulties, because those who are unemployed are 6 times more likely to be suffering from a psychiatric illness than those in employment, and those who are unemployed are 2 to 3 times more likely to take their lives than those who are in employment are gainfully employed. And I just want to highlight how everything must be done to try and overcome that difficulty. I think you know that the small and medium-sized enterprises have a key role to play that. We recognise the work that IDA are doing in relation to job creation and the announcements that are there, but our own indigenous industries, the small and medium-sized businesses, you know, are also a key and a very important area to encourage the growth of employment and life opportunity for people who find themselves in very difficult situation. And I welcome the fact that in the budget, in addition to introducing tax increases announced in the budget, that the bill also builds upon the SME support introduced in the budget, and includes a number of new measures to support the small and medium-sized industries. I believe the SME, as I already have said, that sector will be the driver of the economic recovery across the country, and I welcome the fact that the government is committed to supporting this sector, and that the primary focus in Budget 213 and the Finance Bill 213 is on jobs, and specifically why the government prioritised the introduction of measures that would support the SME sector. You know, I just want to mention a few things in relation to this as well. And I suppose it is a new. We don't hear very much about the poverty trap in recent times, but it's certainly there in relation to unemployed people who may gain short-term employment, maybe a week or 2 or 3 weeks, and find it so difficult to make a decision to move off their benefits because it's so hard to recover and so stressful to recover those benefits. So I think there should be better understanding of somebody comes in and says, I'm getting a job next week for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks, but I'm unlikely to continue after that period. And there should be a better understanding, the system should better understand that these type of opportunities should be given to people to do so. Now, finally, I just want to dwell on the whole area of the contribution and the investment in our mental health services. And I welcome the fact that again this year that there was 35 million allocated to the introduction of a vision for change. Now, that's welcome, but we haven't yet seen the plan in place to develop the health services. Now, we know that the plan is to, this year, as in last year, to bring in over 400 professionals to develop the community-based mental health services. But it's important that that plan is in place quickly, because the delay in last year frustrated the implementation of it, and there has been a carryover to this year. And finally, I would like to say I would really welcome Deputy Minister Kathleen Lynch's commitment to the area and support her again. And this, now I'm looking 12 months ahead.
Deputy, your time is up now.
When we will be asking for a further 35 million for 2014. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. The next speaker is Deputy Tom Barry. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I shall deal with a few aspects of the Finance Act. I'd like to start off on Section 19, which deals with tax treatment of farmers. I welcome the extension of the stock relief. This is comforting news to the ag sector, especially the 100% stock relief for young trained farmers. These are things that mean a lot in the farming scene. It also mentions that these particular farmers have to have business plans set out and agreed with Tagus also. But I think this brings up another aspect that we could look at. We also need, as important as business plans are, cash flow analysis is very, very important. And maybe we should encourage through taxation measures, maybe that would allow for employment of people into farming businesses that would do it maybe on a part-time basis to actually do cash flow analysis on a continual basis. Because farming is very up and down, and it will get more volatile as everything happens. I know we've had a horse food scandal there lately and all that went with it, and unfortunately for farmers it means their income could dip for no fault of their own. So it's very important to have constant analysis of the accounts, and allowing some tax incentive to bring on someone on the farm who's a third party, not a member of the farm themselves, obviously, would be very welcome. In Section 24, which amends Section 1003A of the Tax Consolidation Act and provides tax relief for donations of heritage properties to the Irish Heritage Trust or to the Commissioners for Public Works. This is a very practical change and I welcome it. It allows accompanying buildings and lands to be donated in tandem with heritage gardens. Now, I know it's a very small part of it. I think it's a very good one. I think it will see important heritage properties coming to the state for very little cost, but it's really, really important because we may not get the chance to get these properties again. However, I would encourage the Minister to increase the tax relief not to 65% and not the 50% that he's looking at. And I understand that there's more being purchased, so he's trying to get value. But in this property market that is depressed, even allowing a 65% on what is essentially one-offs would be practical. So on Section 29, the Living City Initiative, this is really welcome. Certainly, we can all appreciate that getting families back into the centre of cities and refurbishing old homes brings life to cities, and it's just it's a nice measure in the bill. I'd like to deal next with Section 45, and I think we have a problem here. The limit of 3 million should be removed for capital gains tax on land transfers, because very simply this discourages lifetime transfers, and that is something I just feel we cannot do. In death, it's quite obvious enough there are no capital gains tax implications. And I mean, we do not want a situation where farmers will not transfer land over until they go to their eternal reward. We have a situation at the moment where we have a very elderly population in farming. And with the targets we're setting out for ourselves in Harvest 2020, this is a very worrying issue. And we will not achieve those targets with land not being transferred to young farmers. Just simply will not happen. And anything that discourages transfer of land, cannot be allowed. Capital gains tax was introduced in 1974, when land values were around €500 an acre, and the indexation factor, which was abolished in 2002, had reached a factor of about 7, giving land values about €4,500 an acre, roughly speaking. This causes a capital gains issue of about €8,000 an acre presently. Now, I won't get into the marginal relief, it gets too complicated for this point in time. However, it's something that needs to be looked at, because there's no initiative at the moment to hand land over. And I mean, also, there's 3 million. It might sound a lot, but when you're involved here, when you add up the cost of stock, the cost of buildings, and they're getting more and more complicated by the day, milking parlours, etc., and you reach that figure, and it will put an impediment to transfer over. Now, this also applies. This also applies to many qualifying businesses as well. So it's not just farming. And I feel, unfortunately, we don't have a retirement scheme in place at the moment, which was hugely valuable, and it came through Europe, where it allowed a retirement pension to elderly farmers, and it gave them a sense of financial stability, and it allowed them to transfer over their land. And there is nothing like youth and vibrance to increase production and to move farming in a new direction. I myself, I'm glad to say, was a recipient of the farm retirement scheme, in the sense that my parents received it. It created the stimulus to transfer land, and it allowed us to move in a direction which saw production increase considerably, and therefore more benefits to the state as we moved along. So I just think that this is one area that needs to be looked at more closely. With regards to section 46, this is a really, really good measure. Relief from capital gains tax for restructuring our farms. One of the historical problems we've faced in Ireland is the whole farm structure. The fragmentation issue is it's incredible. Having your farm in different fragments is a high cost game. First of all, you have to travel from one place to the other. It's cost to move machinery, cost to move animals. You can't build up necessary infrastructure because you don't have enough land around your parlour. So this is a fabulous scheme. I'm amazed it hasn't been thought of earlier, and I would say to the Minister, look, keep an open mind on the final date here. Don't be welded to the closing date that's here, because look, farmers have a tie to their land, and it takes them a while to get their head around, if I actually leave go this part of my land and swap it for another part. So you just have to bear in mind that there might be a conflict until they can bed it in properly that this is a good idea. So I'd watch it closely, and it's something I think that will start once it gains momentum, but that momentum will take a little while to build up. So just keep that in mind. Section 56, I just, might have a look at that regarding niche producers and microbreweries. Especially, I've come across ones where, you have micro cider production. These people need a stimulus in their early business production. And, maybe we should look at allowances being allowed for them there. Section 59C, carbon tax. Maybe I would encourage the Minister to enter into discussions with the farm contractors associations regarding carbon tax on farms. It is just another spancel to production, and farming doesn't have very large incomes at the moment, and I just feel that this is something that needs to be looked at. Maybe consider tax reliefs for people who substitute fuel with carbon neutral options, because there are options out there. And the reason I'd ask for tax reliefs in this area, and these are quite specific, because there's very high capital costs in putting into place systems which actually replace diesel fuels in agri-production. It's kind of the inverse of section 59C. So if it's good one way, as they say, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, it should come in both directions. Section 71, relation to VAT, reduction from 5. Thank you. From 5.2 to 4.8, while it looks innocuous, and it actually is after having a large effect on the pig industry. Now, I will go into more technical detail on this, but it's after creating a lot of stress there, and maybe it needs to be looked at or exempted for their industry, because they're an industry that are on their knees, and they don't particularly need any more nasty shocks along the way. Rates, in the final one I just want to touch on is rates. I know from anybody who's not in business, there's no appreciation of it, but we need to look at rates in a totality. You can have a situation where you can have a huge ground cover but very low turnover, and you could in fact have rates on a business like that would be a major proportion of the profit, whereas you could have a multinational on the same amount of land and it's only a fraction of their total turnover. So that just needs to be borne in mind. But in conclusion, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this. There are many areas that are progressive, and certainly just a few that need to be looked at in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The next speaker is Deputy Angus O'Snuddy, and you're sharing time with Deputies Des Ellis and Brian Stanley.
I am indeed. Den on my pumps agus cool.
You have 10 minutes and they have 5 minutes each.
Should I?
That's agreed.
Great. Minister, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this piece of legislation. And believe it or not, there are one or two good points in it, and I'll try and capture them in the points that I'm making, and I want to ask one or two questions. But we can't take a finance bill on its own. It is part of a cumulative package. A package kind of which includes the social welfare bill, it includes the property tax, and later this year the water tax. And it also comes on top of a previous finance bill. And it's the cumulative effect of this bill which concerns me greatly, because child poverty is increasing. And since this government came to power, unemployment, long-term unemployment is increasing, youth unemployment is increasing, emigration is increasing, and poverty levels are increasing. So the finance bill, if you take it, is not going to address that. In fact, in this case, it's going to add to the distress of many sections in Irish society, the vast majority. It doesn't, and it's disappointing that it doesn't contain within it a wealth tax. And Deputy Pierce Doherty has explained kind of the benefits of a wealth tax if introduced along the same model, if you want, as FRANT. It doesn't include the third rate of tax on monies earned over 100,000. It doesn't include the tax on online gambling. And there's a whole range of other proposals which were made not only by ourselves in Sinn Féin, but also by trade union movement and also by economists who have said that there is an alternative to the continuing policies of austerity that this government and the previous government have affected or implemented on the Irish public. And kind of one of the issues that is contained within the finance bill is obviously changes in the carbon tax. And again, if you add that to the changes in VAT that were introduced by this government, they add to the problem of fuel poverty in Ireland, and they will add over time, because the people who are most dependent and who have less disposable income are the people who are poorest in our society, and many of those are dependent on social welfare, but they are not exclusively those dependent on social welfare. In this society, at the present, a lot of those who would have in the past been regarded as middle class are the ones who are now feeling the brunt of government policies and are feeling the effects of poverty. And I think every deputy in this House will understand that from having dealt with the public. The problem is that the government doesn't seem to be listening to the plight of those people. And I would urge the ministers kind of to listen to proposals which are made when this goes to committee stage, to try and lessen the effects of this bill, but also to take stock and to look at, can we change direction as proposed by others, where the burden of ensuring that Ireland continues to work, that we get through the problems created by the previous government and by this government, that burden doesn't fall on those who can least afford it or those who can't afford it. One of the reports that kind of highlights very starkly the effects of austerity was one that was published only last week, I think, and it was launched by one of your own colleagues, Nessa Childers, your MEP. It was the Caritas Europe report, and it was a study of the impact of the crisis and austerity on the people, with special focus on Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal and Spain. And again, the findings in this report demonstrate beyond doubt that the austerity measures are impacting very negatively on the lives of people in poverty, and is in fact driving more people into poverty. It shows kind of the increased unemployment levels in all of those countries, especially in youth unemployment and long-term unemployment. It shows the rises in financial distress kind of by those people who are dependent on social welfare in those countries, but also those who are on low paid or who are in reduced employment especially. It shows that income poverty is up, that child poverty is up, and that fuel poverty in all of those countries is increased. And it also shows up kind of the fact that report has been published, and other reports as well, that there's a lack of poverty proofing of budgets in this country. And it's not just a fault of this government, it's a fault of previous governments. That the simple steps to show kind of that budgetary measures shouldn't in fact be driving people into poverty isn't taken. There isn't either equality proofing, something which your own party had sought in the past. And I would urge you again to look at that, because the people who are mostly affected is often the mother in the home who is trying, or the parent in the home who is trying to ensure that there's food on the table, that the home is heated, and that children can go to school kind of healthy, with food in their stomachs, but also with proper clothes. And Irish society is seeing a reversal of that we're going backwards rather than going forward. In January also, another report kind of which again highlights very starkly the position that we're in is that report from the Irish League of Credit Union, their What's Left tracker. Their findings were stark, and what this bill is going to do is compound the problems that the 61% of respondents who had said that they had €100 less left at the end of the month once their essential bills are paid. That's 1.59 million people left with €50 or less at the end of the month once the essential bills are paid. Now, that is before you impose the property tax on top of them. That is before you impose a water charge on them, and kind of and any changes kind of which the minister allows the likes of the ESB, Bus Éireann or whatever, because those things come separate to these legislations and are allowed by government. And we heard yesterday that the AIB is considering increasing its mortgage interest rate, and that again would impact on a huge amount of those people who only had or had less than €100 left to survive on. So, Minister, there is a cumulative effect. There is a whole package of documentation on that. And then we had this week the leak of the Mangan report, Ita Mangan's report into child benefit and its future. And that is also causing major concern and distress, because if you start implementing that proposal, if you start moving in that direction as the Minister is suggesting, and in fact the Minister has already moved in that direction, because the previous two budgets has cut child benefit despite a Labour Party promise. So if you start moving in that direction, that's another wad of money out of that €100 or €50, depending on which group of people you're taking out of that League of Credit Union report. And you know, that in some ways says it all. So I'd say at the end of this year, that you'll see from the Irish League of Credit Union, if they did the same report, that you'll find kind of the numbers have increased, but you'll also find that the numbers who have absolutely nothing or who are a negative at the end of a month will have increased. Contained within this bill is also the very, very miserly change, kind of which is going to target women in particular. The fact that the maternity benefit is going to be taxed. The fact that the health and safety benefit, and that's the weekly payment for employed women in Ireland who are pregnant or breastfeeding, sorry, kind of that you're going to tax that.